Welcome to the Heartlight Sessions, a podcast about light working your way through dark times. I'm Janae Halstead. I'm a singer-songwriter, holistic vocal coach, intuitive guide, and plant medicine facilitator. I'm also a survivor of childhood abuse, autoimmune issues, and my 30s. I'm on a lifelong healing journey, and along the way, I want to share the ideas and teachings that rock my world. Every week on Heartlight Sessions, I call in artists, healers, and thinkers to explore what's helped them live and thrive from a heart-centered place. Because the heart, it's where the best things happen. If you've ever wondered how to unlock your biggest breakthroughs or how to come back from that stuff that tried to kill you, you know the stuff I'm talking about, the stuff that's supposed to make you stronger. Or if you've ever wondered how to just do you straight from the heart, you're in the right place. So join me, won't you? Let's turn on that heart light. Turning on my heart light. 1,000 volts of sunshine. I am so excited about this podcast episode. I have Hailey Magee with me. Hailey and I go way back to Boston days, like 10 or more years ago. When we were both songwriters in Boston, kind of running in the same music scene. And Hailey now is a world-renowned certified coach who helps people around the world break people-pleasing patterns and master the art of self-advocacy. So she is a genius at helping people set boundaries. And it's been so amazing watching your Instagram feed blow up. I know how hard you've been working the last 5+ years on this topic. And I think so many people are really benefiting from what you're offering as far as education around this topic. And I have resonated so much with your work. I'm really grateful. Okay, so first question.
Bring it on.
Why is it so challenging to set boundaries?
Oh, woof. So I think that's a great question. And there are so many answers. But in my experience, working with people pleasers specifically, I think so many of us, especially in childhood or when we were kind of coming into this world, learned implicitly or explicitly or through our culture that, I am worthy and valuable and lovable when I make other people comfortable.
Yeah.
Or say yes to what other people want from me. And that's a kind of insidious lesson in a way, because it's great to be kind to other people, but once we learn that our value lies in abandoning ourselves to make other people comfortable, it becomes really hard to set boundaries. Because by setting a boundary, it's like I'm risking what makes me lovable. I'm putting my worth and my lovability at risk by saying no to somebody. And for me and my clients, that's the hardest thing of all about them.
Yeah. Being an empath and being a highly sensitive person, I can really relate to this. And also being a survivor of trauma, it's just my boundaries were just not there. It was like a ooey gooey cell that had, that was permeable. And I feel like my output, as far as my neuroception, going into a room and constantly feeling things out to see if I'm safe, that's what's going on. But then at the same time, the thought of really drawing healthy boundaries with people, it just, I don't know, it gives me the cold sweats. I would rather escape a room than have to set a boundary.
Yeah, I love that idea. I'm imagining a tree's roots for this idea of extended nervous system. Because we are, it's blessing curse. I think so many of us are hyper attuned to others' emotions and even subtle shifts in their mood. And I think that can be a superpower because it makes us incredibly empathetic and receptive and attuned. But once we start privileging other people's comfort at the expense of or to the detriment of our own, I think that's where stuff gets messy.
Yeah. In your bio, you talk about a specific romantic relationship that's sort of the catalyst for the people-pleasing work that you do now, and realizing just how much you had self-abandoned. And I knew you during the time and got to witness a little bit of this relationship.
Yeah. It's wild. I mean, looking back, I was in this relationship that had gone on for a while, and I didn't realize it till after, of course, but looking back, it's like I was so hungry for love, as so many of us are. I just wanted to be loved and cared for. And I think I'd learned along the way that to love someone else meant to put yourself aside for them and for the sake of the relationship. And that happened over a period of months and years, and it was crazy. Like it was so slow that I didn't notice it happening. But by the end of that relationship, I'd become kind of like a shell of myself.
Yeah.
Shadow.
Yeah, I remember like even towards the end of the relationship, I just remember seeing how much shifted for you, and almost like you've always been like a go-getter. You're like super smart. And I feel like you were doing a lot of like also managing of this person's like artistry. You were doing a lot for this person. But I remember just seeing you almost go inside yourself. It was like knowing you from, and I didn't know you that well, but we ran in the same circle. And when I first met you, you were just like, you were the first person to jump off the boat when we went out into the ocean one day. And then really like seeing you towards the end of that relationship, and just I felt that stress just coming off of you, and I sensed like how shut down you were and how you felt,
It was a shutdown, because I think that's what it was, kind of like the shadow. And I think like if I had to define what was happening and what precipitated that, the simplest way of putting it is like, I think in a lot of relationships, what happens is you come together with a person and there's a honeymoon stage, and then you reach the point where both parties' needs are being brought up. And sometimes those needs are aligned, and sometimes compromise makes it easy. But in so many relationships, you reach a point where like the other person can't give you what you need, or you can't give them what they need. And I think ideally, maybe you try it and you work out different solutions, but then I think ultimately you reach a point of being like, okay, this is a mismatch. Like, there doesn't even need to be blame involved. It can just be like, we are not compatible. Like our attachment needs aren't compatible. Our jealousies and possessiveness things aren't compatible, whatever. But I think what I've noticed that I did, and what a lot of people I work with do, is they say, oh no, this relationship must be sustained at all costs. Mm-hmm. Even if that means I have to try to suppress or push down my needs, even if it means we're going to be fighting every night for years, because we want that love. And that's what I did. That's what I did. And the reason that relationship ended was actually because he ended it. The other person ended it. And at the time, it felt like the worst thing that ever happened to me, but thank God, because like then I don't think I would have had the strength to even realize how bad it was for me.
Yeah, I think it was a great gift. And then for you to ultimately, I believe that was part of what helped you move into your career. I know you were doing a lot of artist coaching at the time, and then, had decided to go get your certification in coaching. And I'm just curious, like, what is at the core of that makes us want to just stay at all costs? It's so much fear.
I think fear is huge. Like, God, there's so much. I think fear, and it's just like this desire. I think it's also false memory, because when a relationship begins, you have great moments, honeymoon stage, right? You're being loved and adored. And for so many of us, we've like yearned for that feeling.
Totally.
Like, oh my God. But then so when the relationship starts to wither, and then there's animosity and pain, we retain the memory of the beginning. Mm-hmm. Like, oh, it's possible for me to be loved like that, so I will stay no matter what. So there's that memory. And then I think there's also this like scarcity mindset of like, no one else could ever love me this way. The big scary world, like outside of our familiar comfort zone.
Totally.
There's a lot of forces.
a a lot of forces at work, but I'm so curious about, like, you said in your bio that, like, you had no idea kind of what you wanted or what you needed. Like, you just didn't know who you were really. And that part to me also seems terrifying. It's like, I've been there myself, and, you know, not knowing yourself outside of the reflection of like another person.
Oh, I love that. That's
You
such a
know?
good way of putting it. Yeah.
So how did you heal into that? Like, how did you decide, like, this is what I like? This is, you know, what did that look like? What kind of time did that take? And
Yeah.
how did you give yourself the space for that?
Man, that is like, I love what you said about knowing yourself even when you're not being reflected back. I often make the distinction between like people pleasing and self-abandonment, because it speaks to what you're asking. Because like people pleasing is when we put other people first, basically,
Yes.
to the detriment of ourselves. But self-abandonment actually goes way deeper, because it's the phenomenon of not only putting others first, but also even when you're completely alone with yourself, even in the absence of others, you don't know who you are, what you need, what you want. It's just like this void. And that's what I think of when I think of that time, because that's where I was at, like completely disconnected. And I remember for months after that breakup, I was kind of like walking around like a ghost. And I felt so weird because I was like, I don't know what I want. Like, at least in that relationship, I'd been able to say, well, I want to marry him and I want to have kids with him and I want to travel around the world where he goes. Like, it was all about him. After, I remember even going to the grocery store and looking at the shelves and being like, what do I like to eat? No idea. How do I like to spend my free time? No idea. And that process, at least for me, and so many of my clients have the same experience, you know, like they'll be in a therapy session and their therapist will be like, give them an assignment. Like, I want you to spend one whole day doing nothing other than what it is you want to do. And those clients sit there and just look around the room like, I have no idea. And so it's resonant. It's like actually a pretty common thing. And so I think what I had to do and what I encourage people to do is it's like throwing paint at the wall and seeing what sticks. You have to just say yes to things and experiment. And your self never dies. Like, that self that's maybe been smothered under layers of people pleasing is still there. And that self will react and respond when you try something that lights them up. But it's also about having trust that that part of you isn't gone. It's just a little bit buried. Mm-hmm. What do you think?
Oh, it's so beautiful. So well said. And I feel like I'm just healing, like listening to you talk and having this conversation and just feeling it through and thinking about my own journey of healing self-abandonment, which I was like a pro at. And it's really interesting because I do find like, I was like in the mirror the other day and I was like, do I take on like the identity of every guy I've ever been with? Because I'm married now and I'm doing a few things like with my husband, we're working together. And I started down this journey of psychedelics with him and psychedelic medicine. And so I find it really interesting because before I'd be like, I would never do psychedelics. Just my home that I grew up with a dad who was like a total hippie and like always was telling me like war stories about. So my fear around psychedelics were like huge.
Sure.
But now I've come into like medicine in a really unique and beautiful way. And I'm learning about it. But I was like in the bathroom the other day and I was like looking through my relationships and I was like, I feel like I do take on this identity or become a part of whatever it is that the other person like is doing. And I really had to question myself, like, is this truly a path that I'm wanting to go down? Like, am I involved in this for the right reasons? Like, am I just doing this because I always tend to like slide into, you know?
Yes. Oh man. I love the word slide because I feel like it's that discreet. Like, it just happens. It's like, whoop, there I am doing And it's this fine line between intentionally sharing your partner's passions as an act of love and interest versus like, I still grapple with that even now. Like all these years later, I completely relate to what you're saying because I think when there is intimacy, the risk of losing yourself in the other person increases, for obvious reasons.
Totally. And I wonder, as far as your clientele base, I'm guessing that they're like 95% women. I could be wrong.
It's been, what's wild is it started that way. In the beginning, I was really marketing myself to women. And so but what's been wild, Janae, is that in recent months, I would say it's been at least 20 to 30% like men as well as like non-binary folks and trans folks. And that's actually been so cool because it just goes to show that like this is in many ways a universal problem. And we as women face certain cultural conditioning that really encourages us to self-abandon. And it's been interesting to notice the ways that cultural conditioning also comes up for people of other genders, maybe in different ways, but for men, maybe not sharing your true emotions because then you're not stoic and masculine or.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's such an amazing statistic you're sharing. It's so beautiful because it's also revealing that we're entering this time, I think, where men are finally like starting to feel like they can come forward and be vulnerable. It's like, I don't have to ride the the white horse and, on my steed. And because I know men have go through as much self-abandonment, as women do. It's like that's part of this, system that's crumbling that we were trained into. It's like patriarchy just destroys both masculine and feminine, energies. And so I think that that's amazing.
It's super cool. And it's so cool to have these men in my classes just kind of speaking from the heart and really like reckoning with the material. It's great. Like, and I'm so with you. Like the way these systems like crush us. I think this really came up for me. It was really fascinating. I wrote an article last year, something about the phenomenon of self-abandoning kind of in physical intimacy, and how so many folks I work with have this experience of saying yes to intimacy physically when they really don't want to, right? Yes. And it's just kind of like, because my partner's initiating or because the guy I went on a date with bought me dinner, there's so many, this is not talked about enough, but it happens.
Yeah.
And it's challenging because the consent is present. Like we may be saying like, yes, I really want to be intimate with you, but inside the desire is not there. And so many of us are really good at faking it because we've been taught to fake it since we were 0 years old. So anyway, I shared this article and some of this research with my following online. And what was really interesting is the number of men who chimed in being like, I really appreciate you sharing this. I, as a man, feel pressure to always want to be intimate, to always want to initiate. You know what I mean? Like, that's the pressure men face. And so it was a great window to kind of open that and see, like, okay, like, we as women are really disadvantaged in this culture. And men also, like you said, are deeply affected by patriarchal sexual norms, I guess you could say.
Totally. Wow, that is amazing. I'm curious for you as far as I talked a little bit about before we got on the podcast, just about your work with kink. And I'm really curious, like, how you even got to this place where you wanted to explore this world and realized and gave yourself permission to be like, whoa, this is something I've always was it something you always had inside of you and you were a little curious, or did you have one experience and you were like...
I see. Oh, man. I always joke that I've been kinky since the womb. Like, I just think it was like, my earliest fantasies involved elements of power exchange, which is kind of where my kink lives in sort of like the dominance and submission realm.
Yes.
But, no one was talking about that. And especially then, I think now it's become more mainstream. So especially as like a feminist or whatever, and someone who is very much like women's power and like women equality, the idea of being like having a collar on or being like submissive to a man, I had huge ethical conflicts about that, which so many people go through in their kink journey. And then I just dated a couple of like lovely non-kinky partners, so I couldn't express that side of myself. And it's really only been within the last 3 years or so where I've been able to say, to understand that my kink is not a pathology.
Yeah.
And that embedded into kink is really strong structures of like consent and boundaries and desire. Like I can express these desires in a healthy way as long as my partner is there with me in that healthy, like co-created space. So I feel so much more actualized now that I have the chance to express that side of me.
Totally. I was just meditating on it this week as, you know, the interview was coming up, and I was like, it must be like a really safe way. It's like, to me, that's creating a container, you know, and there's rules within a container. I'm sure there's levels of communication. I'm sure there's like, you know, I'm sure different partners and different levels of experience can be like, probably like really mind-blowing and eye-opening and like, you know, but it just to me it's like, oh, I could see why, you know, people explore this. It's to me very fascinating. And like, I have a few friends that are poly, and for me, I'm like, poly just would overwhelm me because I'm like, I'm a hard enough time just with myself. Like, I can barely manage the relationship with myself, and I don't know how people do it, but I've learned through my friends that like they have such better time management, they have better communication, they have better transparency in their relationships because they have to be.
Yes, that's so true. Because it's a container, like the same thing. It's like there are all these norms around, we have to communicate. If this is going to get off the ground, we have to know how to state our needs, set boundaries, know what the limits are. And there's such a huge overlap in the Venn diagram between kinky and poly folks. And I kind of think that's part of the reason, like, we know strong relational skills.
Totally.
And as for the container thing, what's been interesting in like the BDSM world is that I and so many people I know involved in kink have some degree of sexual trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So it really confuses people when you say like, oh, I'm doing these kinky things with my partner. I even had a therapist once being like, oh, well, that just sounds like assault when referring to my consensual kinky experience. I fired her. Boundaries.
Yeah. Right.
But like,
good for you.
But that's the difference, is that now we're going through these actions that not only are like hot to me, but I've consented. We've discussed rules. And so it's almost like I'm reclaiming my power in those moments by, ironically, surrendering my power consensually. It's like a total mind explosion.
And it's so beautiful. It's so much like the expression of the masculine and feminine energies on the planet, actually. And just the dance of giving and receiving and surrendering. And, you know, it's just that, I think that's an incredible dance. And I totally can see where you're taking back your power in that dynamic, you know?
Totally. I love the thought of it being that dance of energies, because it is. And it produces altered states of mind. Like a bunch of research has shown that like both for the dominant and the submissive, especially the submissive, you almost get into this what's an equivalent to like a meditative trance, essentially, because of that complete safety and serenity of sort of like surrendering and releasing that tight grip on control that I think most of us spend our days in. It's wild. I mean, it's chemical. It's wild.
It's amazing. Yeah, it's interesting because it's kind of where I've come to my place with psychedelics, because I think most of my fear around using psychedelics was this loss of control. And that idea of that loss is terrifying, especially I also have a background in sexual trauma. And so for me, I would see myself like all through my life, like trying to control like every situation that I was in. And when you get into a situation where you're under a medicine that is gonna take you places, you know, or bring up aspects of the psyche, or, you know, even take you to your death. It's like, or take you through a death portal. It's like, you don't have control. And what's interesting is none of us do.
Right. It's an illusion.
It's an illusion. But in setting boundaries and creating the container for a relationship, for a kink session, whatever, it's like that. I don't know what that is, but it's part of that universal safety net. It's like, okay, I think at least it defines parameters.
Oh, yes, completely.
You know, it's like, okay, I know how far out the rim goes, and I know what this looks like, and, you know.
Yes, and there's safety to be found in that for sure. And I've really wanted, my partner and I have been talking about really wanting to like dip our toes deeper into the psychedelic space, because I think that like control is so weird, because yes, I've had to learn how to take control of what I can through boundaries and expressing myself truthfully. And like, these are things I quote can control, but also reckoning with just like the conditions of life and knowing how little there is that's truly, I can't chart out the course of my life. Like, I have no idea what's coming.
Yeah.
And getting better at surrendering to that is something I want.
Yeah.
I want it bad.
I'm so curious, you decided you're in your coaching program, and how was it because of this realization of the relationship that you were like, this is something I need to deep dive on? Or were you just in the coaching program and you were like, this is really my jam? Or was it just like, or was it like, this is so painful, I need to mine it?
And I say like yes to all of it. I think like, you know, the coaching training I did was wonderful, and coaching is very, very broad. I think in the simplest sense, if I had to describe coaching, it would be helping people identify what they want and help them get there. Totally. I mean, it's really that broad. So totally. You could go to, I think a lot of people go to coaching and they become like executive coaches or business coaches or whatever. And I knew for me, for a while it was music. And then my interest really shifted, because I was like, I care so much more about these matters of the heart. And it's the classic like wounded healer. You know, I was like, in a way, coaching is almost in and of itself breaking the people-pleasing pattern, saying what you want and working toward it. I mean, that's the antithesis of people-pleasing. And I just knew, like, for me at the time, I was using the word codependency to sort of define what I'd experienced and who I wanted to work with. So I was working as like a codependency recovery coach. And then with time, I broadened that, because I think that label really resonates with some people and really puts others off. So I just wanted to just say, like, I want to help you advocate for yourself and, you know, discover some independence.
Yeah. And I think also the word codependency has so much, almost like a negative connotation. And it's rife with like all sorts of, I think a lot of people don't even know what that means.
Right.
You know?
Completely. It's been, I mean, the word itself has had like a million definitions. It started back in the addiction movement of the 80s, when it was like, oh, a codependent is someone who's dating an alcoholic. Right. I mean, that's the origins of the term. And so it's just like, there's so many different applications now.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me. It's like, when I emailed you, I was like, this is definitely like the last, I don't know why, but it was just like the last area that I wanted to look at in my life. I've been on a healing journey for like 15, 20 years. I remember even like I used to get your emails, or like I'd read some of your articles at first, you know, when you were first putting stuff out, and I'd just be like, oh, no, 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 no. It was super triggering for me.
Wow.
Yeah.
What have you like, I'm so curious in the time since, when you've been looking at this aspect within yourself, like what have you discovered, or like what have some of your takeaways been?
I think it's just that pain of self-abandonment. It's like being able to even put yourself in front of that mirror and be like, I abandon myself all the time. I don't know how to set boundaries with people. I don't know how to say no. It was just like, even though I was healing, I was just constantly, like with every single person, you know, constantly self-abandoning. And I just felt so unsafe in the world.
Ooh. Oh my God, that's resonant.
You know? And then I think it was finally like, I don't know, within the last year, I started like reading a lot of your Instagram posts, and I guess I was just like, I finally decided that I wanted to face that music and show up for myself, because I knew like things weren't really shifting in my life. You know, I just knew, I was like, I'm like a leaf in the wind. You know, and people don't even like to be around someone who's like Pollyanna people pleaser, that like doesn't show up authentically. You know?
That's one of the wild flip sides of this. I actually think people pleaser is kind of a misnomer, because when you flip the script and you think, well, would I want someone to say yes to me when they mean no? Would I want someone to be inauthentic with me? Like, we're all like, no, like, please tell me the truth. So we think we're pleasing people, but it's actually like, it's really not about that.
And you're wasting someone's time. You know? True. And that's like, but for me, it's just like, it just stems from such deep trauma, you know, and not having the voice. And so it was really interesting, because I was like, okay, I'm teaching and coaching women to find their voice. And I'm like setting up this program, and I am not walking my talk. Yeah. And I had to, I had to walk away from launching the program.
Like, because you felt misaligned with what you were inside, and wow.
Yeah. I was like, I can't be coaching women on finding their voice if I can't do that for myself. I can't even speak my truth. You know?
I love like you even saying that. Like, I just think that that's so vulnerable and so real. And I actually feel like this must be more common than we think, because I think so many of us go into healing, heal others and heal ourselves, like the wounded parts. So I resonate with what you're saying. Like, there have been times when I felt I've needed to take a break from some of my posting or some of my workshops, because in those moments I feel like I'm not walking the walk, or I don't feel connected to that stronger self in me. Hard.
Yeah, and then there's the part of us that's like, we're learning as we teach, and what you're doing is so important, and there's not a lot of people in the field actually teaching what you're teaching. So you're, it's like you're a leader and you're a thought leader in this field, and you're helping others, and that's something you have to remember. It's like, then I went back to, I'm slowly going back to it and just realizing like, okay, well, first of all, is this truly my passion? This could be part of my passion, but also like, I don't have to have it all figured out,
That's a fantastic point. We think we have to. But then ironically, what's wild is sometimes I notice having a larger Instagram is actually really fun, because it kind of gives you really cool big picture data on what people want or what they feel, because you get a lot of responses from people.
Yeah.
And you get to see like what types of posts resonate, or what type of language really fires people up.
Yeah.
And ironically, in my own work, I've noticed that the highest performing posts or whatever tend to be ones when I'm kind of sharing from the heart about something vulnerable, ways in which I'm actively coming against my people pleasing in real time, which is exactly what you're talking about like not having it all figured out and kind of just letting yourself be where you are. I think, I don't want to speak like for everyone, but I think a lot of people like learning from teachers who are not just like shepherds on the journey, but like they're with you in it as well.
I totally agree. Someone who's like in the trenches. I mean, why would you learn from someone who doesn't have the embodied understanding?
Right. They're not going to be able to like get it or get the unique growing pains of this work. I think that's the thing that irks me about like modern wellness culture or whatever, is that there's an element of toxic positivity to it, or it's like really prescriptive, like just do these actions But what that all leaves out is the emotional underbelly, like the fear, the guilt, the incredible self-doubt we feel in this work, like the feelings of paralysis or the feelings of disconnection, loneliness, like that is literally, in my opinion, 75% of the work.
It's everything. And then all the chemical responses that go along with those emotions. And a lot of times that just puts people in paralysis. Yep. You know, like they cannot move forward.
Yes.
Because they're just like, they don't even know how to shift or, you know, understand even what's happening emotionally for them in the moment. You know, I think a lot of times, like when I feel a deep sense of like shame, or I don't know, shame's a big one, but it's almost like this black wall goes up and it like blank slates my memory. And then I can't really move forward on working on an aspect of healing that I wanted to, because I can't touch the core of what it is that is wounding me or is wounded. I don't know how to describe that, but the emotional aspect is, you know, and sifting through and understanding and recognizing that underbelly is so important.
Totally. And that feeling of shutdown, like the black wall, it's like beautiful language to describe that. It's hard because it's like being able to identify, we can't always control it, but sometimes being able to identify, like, I don't want to do things that are going to send me into complete shutdown. That's something I work with people a lot on, is like being able to identify like incremental, like small ways of strengthening that muscle of like self-advocacy. Because I've seen and I've experienced myself when I go too heavy into it, because I'm feeling ambitious and I really want to heal myself and everything. I've been there too, where it's like the nervous system state just becomes so activated that I'm just like, whoops, like now I'm in survival mode and I'm going to spend the next week on my couch, not leaving my apartment, because I feel just enclosed in this pit of like.
Totally. Yeah. It's like the dorsal freeze that, and I'm so curious as far as like, for you, are you teaching your clients to find like their no and their yes? And in doing so, do you have a methodology or, you know, a way that you're helping them kind of sort through that?
Yeah, I think like one thing that I talk about, one like premise that informs a lot of my work with people is like, a lot of people come to me saying they want to learn to set boundaries and advocate for themselves. And what I try to teach them is that I use the metaphor of an iceberg. So like setting a boundary and speaking your truth is at the top of the iceberg. But beneath that, there are all these layers that have to come first. So things like emotional literacy, being able to identify what you feel. Because our feelings are like boundary signposts. Like if I'm feeling resentful or overwhelmed or angry, I need to be able to identify that so I can move into, okay, then what are my needs? What is this feeling telling me that I need? That's also hard for the recovering people pleaser to just name that.
Totally.
Then you have to feel you are worthy of that need being met, which is like, that's the one right before the boundary. So only then you've identified the feeling, you've identified the need, you think you're worthy of the need, then you set the boundary. But no one talks about that. But like all of that is required.
It's all required. And I think at the base of that is the worthiness piece. Yep. And for me, that's like where the where things have been so slippery with me. Because it's deeply painful. And there's a big part that's like, I don't know why I have this or where it came from, which it's like, I know there's a lot to do with trauma. And then at one point I was just like, I don't even know if this is healable. You know, I don't even know how I gain my self-worth.
It's such a huge thing. So that is not something I'm able to address fully with people, because it just feels like trying to put the cosmos in a jar. Like it's so big. But again, for me, like as a coach, one thing my training did really help me with was thinking about incremental stuff. So I don't like something I encourage people when they're like, all right, the truth is I do know what my needs are. I just don't know if I'm like worthy of them. So a simple tool, and this might sound trite, but it's like at the smallest degree, it's like, all right, well, what if, let's just imagine that you did believe you were worthy of it. Or even better, let's imagine someone who's not even you. Like, let's imagine someone who believes they are worthy of having this need met. How would they proceed? What would they ask for? How would they exist in the world? And just being able to identify like those tiny little steps, we act as if we were worthy. I think there's a lot of like wisdom in the idea that we often think we need to feel a certain way in order to act a certain way.
Yes.
But sometimes we flip the script. Acting a certain way then creates the feeling of worthiness within us.
Yeah, I mean, and that's like even manifesting 101. That's like,
Right.
you know, and the whole fake it till you make it thing. You know?
There's value in it. You know what I mean? Like, again, within reason. Like, we're not going to shove ourselves into an activated state, but just like small steps.
Totally. Yeah. I love that. It's almost like putting on your worthiness spacesuit. You know?
So much. That's juicy.
Like...
right? And from this place, like, who can you become? Or encourage people to channel like a role model. Like, okay, who's someone you know that really acts like they're worthy?
Yeah.
You know, Beyonce. Like, what would Beyonce do?
I love that. Oh, it's funny. I mean, for me, like, there was some part of me that felt really abandoned by, like, source, that I was just deeply alone. And doing psychedelics has opened me up to these deep understandings of, like, how much even Gaia, like, the planet Earth, like, so supports us and loves us so much. And also opening up to communicating with like my guides and feeling that like that sense of love that has come so deeply like into my cellular matrix that in that way that has really loosened up a lot of that. And then I can start to walk that path, or I continue to walk that path of like, oh, I'm here for a reason. I'm worthy to be here. And my struggles have been part of my story and my gift to help others, you know?
I'm like hearing you and just like so happy for you that you've like connected to that source and that Gaia and that it's been so healing. Like, I think I often feel like existentially untethered to anything. So that, like, I hear how important that is.
Maybe other people don't feel that or experience that, but for me, it took like this sort of dropping of the veils of the illusion of Maya for me to really be like, oh, okay, wow, you know?
It reminds me of attachment. Like, you know that classic study where they put like a mother and a baby in the room, and when the mother is attuned to the baby and paying attention, it's only then that the baby feels free to wander off and play. Mm-hmm. Like when there's that secure attachment. Yeah. It almost reminds me of that, but with source.
Yeah.
Like when you're feeling more connected and held in source, it then empowers you to venture off and like be more in the world.
Totally.
Like, yeah, that's so beautiful.
I'm curious. I'm wondering if you're gonna like write a book on emotional literacy or anything. I would gobble that up.
Yeah, I actually have, and my agent and I have an agent, and we are just about to send the book out to some publishers and see if they bite. So the last round of edits right now, and I spent like all last year just like writing this book, and it was so hard. I mean, it's still in the works. It's very much in the works, but oh my God, it was so fun. Because like so much stuff these days is very ephemeral. It's like a post here, a sound bite here. So to have the opportunity to sort of brain dump like the whole big picture idea into a book was just so fun. So hopefully that's out in the world over the next year or two.
I have a good feeling about it. Even that I asked, I was like, I really want to read this book. And so I have a good feeling that's gonna come to fruition soon for you.
Thank you. It's exciting.
It's very exciting. I feel like we could talk all day. I might have to have you on again. I know you have to go.
Too.
Yes, I would love that. Have to have you on again soon.
I would love that too.
Yeah.
But such a good conversation. I feel like I have to
So
journal
good.
about this actually.
I
Because
know.
so much of what you said about like the shame blackness and like the source and the sort of reconnection, like that feels really deep and important.
Yeah. Yeah, and having this conversation has helped me kind of put words to some of the feelings. It's like, oh, there's literal like language we can create around this. So that's really, really amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, my friend. It's so good to see you.
So good to see you. You look so beautiful.
Ditto. Let's keep the channel open. I want to talk more.
Great.
Okay.
The Heartlight Sessions podcast is executive produced and hosted by me, Janae Halstead. It's edited, mixed, and mastered by me too. And that theme song you hear, it's called Heartlight. And yep, you guessed it, it's from my record Disposable Love. Got questions about a certain healing modality or about heart-centered healing? Or maybe you just need some advice on life, love, or creativity? Send it my way. Email me at letters@heartlightpodcast.com. Until next time, I'm Janae Halstead, and thanks for listening to Heartlight Sessions. Turning on my heart light, 1,000 volts of sunshine.